No doubt you've seen the words Sweetbaby Inc. in recent weeks, and that's probably why you've clicked this video. This is an incredibly complex, while also stupidly simple topic, and I'm going to do my best to explain it all. I want to try and give you both sides with my opinion mixed in, because then you can better understand the whole picture and not just a single-sided narrative. This whole topic is essentially what's being called and what feels like Gamergate 2.0, and it's probably going to escalate from here, just like Gamergate did back in 2014. 2018, Sweetbaby Inc. was founded in Montreal. They described themselves as a, quote, narrative development and consultation studio with a mission to, quote, tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video game industry, with an aim to, quote, make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive for everyone. So cutting through the PR speak, they are hired by game development studios as a contractor to work on their products with involvement depending on the studio needs. This can range from simply proofreading scripts with an eye for how it will be perceived publicly by certain groups, or all the way to full-blown writing narrative and characters with their own team. Regardless of their level of involvement, they are still a consultant firm, which means their work is subject to approval and direction of the people that are hiring them, putting the final decision of what they do, how they do it, and what makes it into the final product firmly on the people making the decisions on the game. With that being said, their main focus is on what people refer to as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's who they are and what they do, even according to them. So why are they suddenly the talk of the internet? Why is it such a big deal? To put it bluntly, an employee of Sweetbaby Inc. decided to employ the age-old strategy of the Streisand effect. They saw a tiny issue from a small group of people online, and instead of letting it exist in the free market, they saw it as an attack and tried to fight back. Basically, a Steam curator group appeared around January 30th, 2024 called Sweetbaby Inc. Detected. This group had a couple thousand followers and existed to simply leave a negative review on any game they found that was working with Sweetbaby Inc. That way, followers of the group who wished to boycott games that hired a diversity consultation group during development could easily spot them and do so. They wasn't telling people what to do. They didn't direct harassment or incite any form of violence towards anybody. They just said, these games worked with Sweetbaby, here's a link of the proof, and that's it. Make your own decision. Now personally for me, just for the record, I don't see any level of nuance to reviewing a game that works with Sweetbaby negatively just based on that. I tend to judge games based on the merit of whether the game's good, what's in it that I do or don't like, and then go from there. But I also do not care if people decide not to play a game because they don't like the idea of this company existing or being involved with their games. It's exactly what people should be able to do to vote with their wallet, as people have been saying for many years. Even if I don't agree with you on why you're doing something or how you came to that conclusion, it should be reasonable that if people feel that they don't like this thing, they can simply not buy it. And having a curator group point out that it's there just so they're informed one way or the other, that seems totally fine. So nobody was really going too crazy about the fact that this curator group existed, right up until this employee of Sweetbaby Inc. decided to employ the tactic of cancel culture. They were saying that they were the victim of harassment without any evidence being posted, and ironically then calling for the harassment of the people responsible for those unsubstantiated claims. The employee in question, Chris Kindred, called for the Steam curator group to be reported, and I'll use a quote, "Anyway, report the fuck out this group." They also linked to the Twitter account of the curator group creator and aimed their audience to report that person specifically and maliciously, pointing out how the creator, quote, loves his account so much. Essentially putting people to task, asking them to brigade this person, trying to get their curator group removed and their Steam account banned, and all because they leave negative reviews saying Sweetbaby was involved in this game, which is not harassment. Telling people to go and report somebody for no reason is harassment. So again, my view is that Sweetbaby Inc. or companies like it being involved in gaming is a non-issue. But before you take a side on my opinion, please watch the video and I'll go into why I feel that way. It's much bigger than them, and therefore they don't really matter. But either way, however you feel about it, for or against the involvement or the concept of an inclusive and diversity-focused narrative consultancy company, the common sense opinion here is that this employee was out of line and was ironically calling for the harassment of an individual by name while playing the victim the whole time. The Streisand effect took place almost immediately, with the small curator group swelling to over 200,000 members within a couple of days, as well as igniting the culture war yet again, and probably the most significant gamer versus games journalist feud since the original Gamergate situation in 2013 onwards. We'll get into how games journalists reacted to this whole situation in a minute, which of course made everything worse, as they always do, as well as what people discovered about the employees of Sweetbaby Inc. But first, I feel like we do need to give you the cliff notes of Gamergate in case you didn't follow the situation. I'm not going to go over the whole history of how it started or touch on each individual contentious detail, because that's a whole video in and of itself, but I will give you the feeling and thought about what it became. At the time, there were specific examples of game journalists playing favourites, scratching each other and some game developers' backs. Gamers found out, they got angry about it, there were a bunch of back and forths on social media, some big creators at the time spoke up about it and were silenced in certain areas of the internet, articles by journalists were written about gamers and how they're toxic, lots of references about toxic, white, straight, male gamers, and essentially painting people who were involved in this discourse as bad due to many times being men and white and gamers. There was, of course, extremist opinions on both sides. There were people harassing from one side. This was going on. And then at some point it was objectively proven that game journalists were working together behind the scenes across multiple large publications, using private communication networks to push narratives through their outlets and to work together on publishing similar articles and stories all at the same time, thus proving some of the point about games journalism and how it was no longer fit for purpose of informing their core audience of video game players, nor serving them in a responsible and ethical manner. Basically, the apparatus which should have been serving gamers had been hijacked with narratives, and these people were pushing their own ideologies and helping their friends, as opposed to serving that main audience. Eventually, Gamergate devolved into social justice warrior versus anti-social justice warrior, woke versus anti-woke, and the topic has essentially turned into a tribalistic us versus them, with battle lines drawn in the sand. On both extreme ends of the spectrum of the issue, there are ridiculous opinions and statements. Gamergate is possibly the alpha test for online political discourse, and it was one of the first large-scale examples of what people now call the culture war. Most of the initial points are forgotten by many involved or were never known in the first place, and instead it's people shouting at each other about being woke or a Nazi, depending on which side is doing the shouting. It's gotten to the stage where a pride flag in a game or a gay character or a black character can be considered woke for a game, and also if you shoehorn a bad character in or change a character's gender or race or something that people care about and thought was integral to the story, having any kind of opinion about that sometimes gets you labelled as a bigot or something else. That's just to say people have moved on from what the initial issue was, and now it's turned into this big thing where everyone's picked a side and they're just going at each other about everything. Obviously this is a very broad overview of the issue, but the feeling from Gamergate and what it evolved into is that there is now one group on the far left who are trying to ruin games and labelling much of the gaming market as white straight men, they're problematic, they're bad, they're toxic, and then a group on the far right of the topic who think that adding in pronouns, pride flags, minorities or traditionally oppressed groups of people is damaging to the product and an attack on their existence. Obviously this is the two extremes, and I'm not saying people who agree or disagree on aspects of this particular issue fall into those extreme categories, but just that these are some of the extreme views. So now we know roughly, at least, what Gamergate is, what Sweetbaby Inc. is, and what they did to start the situation. Now we need to outline what the perceived issue is with Sweetbaby as a concept, and also why people are angry about it, and what the real issue is that people might have missed. So the perceived issue is that DEI is ruining games. DEI, again, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Essentially adding in marginalized groups to games to be more inclusive of an updated demographic of people who play or may play video games. This, I think, is an issue where most people would reasonably agree as a concept is not bad. Not inherently anyway. After all, we know that other people that don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't think like us are out there in the world, so why shouldn't those people exist in our media too? The reason people seem to be unhappy is that they believe these companies are coming into studios and ruining what would otherwise be good games that they might enjoy, especially when those games or those products, those TV shows, those movies, those books, whatever they're going to be, are franchises and stories that they've grown up with and have a connection to. People are unhappy with the idea that studios exist entirely to strip mine out the basis of what they liked about those stories or what they knew about those characters and make them into something else in a cynical manner, purely for the sake of being inclusive and not to enrich stories or organically create good products. I don't think most people on this issue care whether or not there's gay or people of colour in their stories. A lot of people just don't want the stuff that they already know changing just for that purpose. Making new stories and good products with people that are diverse typically doesn't seem to be an issue for most people. And they're not wrong to feel this way specifically, because if a company was coming in and doing exactly that, it wouldn't be good for the product. Not because of including more demographics who are usually not represented, but because they're being used as props instead of created and used in a manner that makes sense and respects them as complex people and cultures, that tells their plight, their stories, and does them justice. Adding in diversity and including people in order to simply check a box and say, look at us, we're doing this diversity thing, wouldn't be fit for purpose. And people generally shouldn't support that practice if it was proven to exist. The issue here is that Sweetbaby Inc. is not really the right target for this entire concept. After all, they are simply an outsourcing tool that does lots of different work and not always specifically DEI work, even if that is a core focus. They are, after all, just a contractor, which means they are being brought in at the behest of the people making decisions. They then have to have their work signed off on by people making those decisions. This begins and ends with the people who are writing those checks, who are signing off on that work. This would be going on, whatever we're going to classify this as, with or without Sweetbaby or any third party existing. So that's clearly what some of the studios want. Also, I think most people would agree that having organic stories involving people of all walks of life are good for everybody involved. That doesn't mean we should remove all straight white men from everything, because obviously that would be stupid and going way too far the other way. Then the concept around things like Sweetbaby comes into play, which we'll get into in a minute. Just like it's widely agreed upon that travel broadens your horizons and opens your mind to other people's viewpoints and seeing the world differently, so too does engaging with different people and looking at things in a new light. We've seen many recent examples of explosions in growth and interest in foreign media, whether that is foreign film, the likes of Parasite, the South Korean movie being the first ever to win an Academy Award in the West, or the massive uptick in South Korean TV shows on Western Netflix with things like Squid Game breaking records. We can apply this to expansion of Japanese products like anime and manga in the West, as well as Japanese games too. There are countless examples of this, where stories are told from different cultures, different perspectives, more diverse, more inclusive, and I don't think the majority of people, even those who speak out against things like Sweetbaby, are against the idea of having this happen, these diverse characters, casts, and ideas in gaming. I think what most people are against is the idea that this diversity comes from a place of cynical and forced inclusion that does not feel or act organic, as well as that a lot of these studios, a lot of these people making these decisions are proven time and time again to hate these people. If you were to say we want to be inclusive and diverse and add in more people, most can say, okay, we're coming along for the ride. But then when you check the Twitter accounts of the people saying they're trying to be inclusive and they're saying they hate straight white men, obviously then seeing things change, a lot of people's brain go to, you were trying to take us out of the thing that we enjoy. And there are examples of this every single time, even from Sweetbaby. There's countless screenshots going around of tweets made by these employees in which they show a disdain for white straight men. The person who started all of this with the call for harassment has examples exactly like this. And again, Lego Butts, who claims to work with Sweetbaby Inc., for instance, said they are grossed out when they see, quote, straight white rich people kiss, which, as you can tell, is not a very inclusive statement to be making and speaks to the deeper issue with companies that are pursuing and pushing diversity and inclusion if they feel this way about a group of people. Not only a group of people, but the largest market force for the product they're consulting on and creating. And this is really simple. If this was a white person saying they're grossed out by another race of people kissing, they would be undoubtedly labelled as a bigot, a racist, or some other word to tell them that they're a bad person, and probably to cancel them if they were a public figure. Lego Butts also posted a Twitter quote, "Pay me to shoot down your white male lead game ideas," which of course means leading characters that are white and male. Adding 2 and 2 together here from the previous tweet, this person who is working on inclusive game narrative makes it seem like inclusion isn't the goal. There are of course dozens more examples of this from people associated with a company or people posting stories about this on their side, but the core issue remains the same. These are statements that most people would not dare utter aloud about other races, genders, or sexual orientation, and yet people who are working on game narratives and ideas are so comfortable with the idea that this is okay, they're willing to say it out loud on their company-linked account. Not just that, but if this is what they're comfortable saying online, what else do they feel that they don't say? If people that are trying to write stories to be inclusive feel this level of disdain for the majority population that play the games, why wouldn't people want to fight back against this narrative in this company and companies like it? Again, I think most people are fine with diversity and inclusion. What they're not fine is that these are the people doing that. Even the Sweetbaby CEO at a game developer conference compared white male heterosexual gamers to babies.
We still look at our core demographics and say, okay, they're white, cis, hetero males, and we cater almost exclusively to them. And the problem is that we don't just cater to them like, here's something that we think you'll enjoy. We cater them the way that we cater to like a picky baby.
Now she's obviously making a point here that if you cater games to a single audience and it remains consistently the same, they're going to be resistant to change, which is true, but singling out white, cis, heterosexual males here is part of the issue people take with this stuff. The obvious solution for all is to make games for everyone without thinking about people's genders, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or other immutable characteristics or lifestyle choices. Games, just like other media, should be created with a vision of telling a story or an experience without tailoring it to someone based on these traits. Make stories that make sense to have those people in it, and that's fine because then you're not taking anything from anyone or shoehorning anything in. People have, provably, and will continue to enjoy a diverse cast of characters in a story outside of their personal experience, so long as it's well made and done properly. This is a fact you cannot argue, and the people who will not enjoy that or participate, they were never going to in the first place, because they probably are the extreme fringes of a tiny fraction of real racists and bigots. But when you try to shove diversity and inclusion down people's throats at the expense of their experience, and even while provably showing contempt for that group of people, that's clearly going to damage and undermine your entire goal in the first place, and you are the one that is doing things you're accusing other people of doing. When you say you hate white men, why is anybody going to take you seriously or accept you for the person that's for inclusivity? Now, let's introduce the game journalist reaction, because this finishes off the point of what people really need to focus on and why this situation is basically Gamergate 2.0. As soon as the whole situation went public and consumers, Sweetbaby, were going viral, game journalists started to publish articles in which they didn't address any of the middle ground opinions or coverage, didn't acknowledge any of the real concerns normal people have, and ignored completely what Sweetbaby Inc. employees had done or said, basically painting a total one-sided anti-gamer narrative. Again, this plays into exactly what they were doing before, the toxic, white, straight male gamer. Now obviously the first one that came was the Kotaku article, but if you go on Twitter, you're going to find many more games journalists doing the exact same thing, ignoring the facts, painting one side as the very bad people and their side as the very good people. More articles have come out, but there's too many to go through, so I'm just going to focus on this one, the one that started it all. This is written by Alyssa McCanty, who represents the whole situation as if she is some wartime hero going undercover behind enemy lines into enemy territory, hiding from secret police. In reality, she pressed join on a public Discord invite link and then asked some gamers, some normal people in a public channel, a few questions. This is all presented as if it's some wild group where people are going to do crazy things and she's really at risk. But she just joins and asks a few questions and then they ban her when they find out she's a journalist for Kotaku. She basically opens the article as she means to continue, which is comparing a Discord group and Steam curator that simply leaves negative reviews on games involved with Sweetbaby to Kiwi Farms, which is a website that has a deep history and tie to much online harassment, essentially opening the article by poisoning the well for readers who might assume that a crossover in interest between the curator group and Kiwi Farms makes them equal in action. This is done for only one purpose, and again it's to poison the well for readers. So then she goes on to compare the situation to Gamergate, which ironically Kotaku was a major player in starting and perpetuating in the first place. Overall, the article labels people who participate in this conversation as bad actors. The article is entirely one-sided and an entirely biased view on the whole situation. It's exactly what you would come to expect from games journalists, who often treat gamers as if they literally despise them and would rather be writing about anything except games, which is funny since often that's exactly what they do, like when they bring up politics during reviews of video games or game consoles. The article was the least of the issues though, because when it went live, Kotaku posted it on their Twitter and people started to question it. One user on Twitter posted on the thread saying, quote, "Does this article mention anything about the Sweetbaby Inc. CEO being a full-blown racist? Because I have a feeling this article doesn't mention it." Alyssa McCanty's response to the tweet reads as follows: "Hi, you can't be racist against white people. Thanks for tuning in." Which makes it really hard to script this section of the video, because where do you even begin? This obviously went viral real quick because even on the surface of the statement, it's utterly ridiculous. Not just that, but this is coming from the senior editor for one of the largest Western game media outlets on the planet. And if you don't know what a senior editor does and why this is such a big deal, they oversee the entire editorial process, meaning they enforce the standards of the entire website and their views, essentially making sure that every article that goes live is in line with how Kotaku feels. This is the person who makes sure opinions are consistent in their content and align with the company values. They are the responsible journalist who is serving you, the reader, and helping you to navigate the world through their work. A person who is so terminally entrenched in the culture war and blind to any world experience that they believe they can redefine words. Racism definition reads: prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. Now clearly she's putting all the emphasis on the part of the definition that says typically, but in reality, racism exists everywhere on the planet against every race, and if you left your bubble, if you traveled the world, you'd see this. If you're white and you go to anywhere where you're the minority, you will experience this. And I'm also not going to sign on to this idea that all white people are the same, when there's a vast array of people who have been treated differently throughout time and are still. The idea that white is just a thing and there's no culturally diverse aspect to it across the planet is wild. So the idea you can't be racist to white people comes from a very sheltered culture war approach to a worldview, and as a statement, is pretty close to racism in and of itself. Obviously people didn't take kindly to this remark, so Alyssa set her Twitter to protected to avoid the bombardment of what I assume were very reasonable people interacting with her public account. But she felt the need to do exactly what games journalists have been doing for the last decade when it comes to the topic of fighting gamers, which again, I want to remind you are the people they're supposed to serve with their work. She had one final go at antagonizing them as much as possible. She accomplished this by changing her Twitter banner to a quote of her saying "you can't be racist to white people," which even in the way it was written was just incredibly smug and childish. So obviously at this stage, many games journalists came out to utter much of the same rhetoric, doing easy slam dunks on the most extreme of views and appealing to the culture war of us versus them, making the entire issue about racists, toxicity, and white male gamers. How if anybody spoke out about Sweetbaby Inc., they were clearly just a right-wing extremist and they hated minorities and gay people. This is exactly how almost every conversation always goes online now, and it's the bigger issue that people should care about. Not a consulting firm that has worked on some great games and some stinkers. The fact that the largest media outlets that cover games are operated by people who detest gamers and continue to band together in this effort. In fact, this is the exact reason why I think movements like anti-Sweetbaby Inc. gain traction even from the most reasonable and moderate gamers. It's because they hate the games journalists so much that they see them talking about white heterosexual male gamers yet again and how they are bad people even if they've done nothing wrong, and they just say, fuck this. If these guys are doing that again, I'm on the other side no matter what side that even is. Because again, I'm not going to deny that there aren't people who just see a gay person in the game and they're like, that's woke, I hate that, I'm never playing it. Which to me doesn't make any sense. Those people do exist, and I disagree with that. But I think most people, if you look into the nuance of what's being said and what they care about, they're not doing that. If you ignore all those things and look at them as if they're all the same, you're part of the problem. And that's why they don't like you and why they're probably going to be in that group. But I think this video is getting kind of long, so I'll try and wrap it up. I just want to reiterate upon my stance here, as well as give some examples that I've seen pop up on both sides of the argument relating to games that were ruined by companies like SBI. There are thousands of examples of products out there that were not ruined by inclusive storylines with diverse characters. Even within the roster of games worked on by SBI, Spider-Man 2 reviewed and user reviewed incredibly well. God of War Ragnarok is considered to be a fantastic game as well, but they've also worked on some utter stinkers, like Kill the Justice League game that just released recently as a complete flop. What I'd say is that this is very simple. A good game is good, regardless of anything else, and a bad game is bad the exact same way. Kill the Justice League wasn't a bad game because of anything related to a DEI consultant firm working on it. It was a bad game because it was a live service pile of slop that had nothing anybody wanted. Writers and game developers are capable of making bad products all on their own. They don't need some other stuff to ruin games. They can do that themselves. Had SBI not worked on the game, it would still have sucked. Just like Gollum sucked, just like Anthem sucked, just like the majority of game releases even in AAA are mediocre at the very best. It's also impossible to know what exactly, if anything, they've changed or done to each game on a case-by-case basis, but again, it's on the game developers and higher-ups who bring them in and okay their work in the first place, meaning the blame, if you feel that blame exists, is firmly on the people making these decisions and not on these individual companies like SBI. They're just a tool being wielded, and if that tool didn't exist, they'd simply use another one or an in-house one. And overall, the biggest issue is the game journalists banding together to demonize the free market of opinions and consumers voting with their wallet. They ignore indefensible tactics from their side, their co-workers, their friends, while perpetuating a narrative that quite literally harms their cause and galvanizes moderates, bolstering what they class as enemies in the culture war they help to perpetuate. This issue is being made into an us versus them, again, like a total repeat of history with no one learning from the past decade, proving that even moderate opinions on a topic will have you labeled as a terrible person by the apparatus that should be bound to report both sides, but clearly has little interest in doing so. I'm sure this video, I'm going to be called woke, I'm going to be called a bigot, I'm sure people won't have listened to what I said, they might have heard some words and think I fall on either side, but I think both sides have issues on the extremes, and nobody's listening to the middle issues that most people care about and where most people rest. So overall, I think the cultural import of ideas from other people and cultures is good. I think seeing things from other perspectives is good. I think diversity is good. I do not think putting people who seem to hate white straight men or any other group in charge of any of this is good. I do not think game journalists who should be ethically bound to represent their readers' best interests but hating them is good. I think this entire situation is going to be warped and co-opted, so any form of nuance or rational conversation goes out the window, focusing on the smaller things and not the big picture. Either way, that's just my take on things. I just like video games, I like when they're good, and I think including people and their stories is good. Even if traditionally we haven't had them in our games before, I think that's fine. I think they deserve to be represented as well, so long as it's done well and respects them. I'm not a big fan of changing characters. I personally don't care and I'll still play them. So long as it makes sense, I'm good with it. I understand why people wouldn't be, but I'm not going to come along for the ride that anyone who has a different opinion is a really bad person or one of these things we're going to label them as. When somebody says something like, I don't like insert group, sure, say that about them. When somebody says, I don't like this being forced on me, maybe listen to why they feel that way. I like good games, I don't like bad games, and if a game is badly written just to shoehorn inclusivity or diversity, it shouldn't exist. Just like if a game is badly written for any other reason, it also shouldn't exist. But inclusivity doesn't make games bad. Bad design and shit writers makes games bad. And the games press does not serve anyone but themselves, their friends, and their version of events. We've known this to be the case for many years, but this is just the most recent example and one that will continue to divide the industry, earning people tags and names that serve only to justify ignoring opinions and dismissing conversations. If your first reaction is to call somebody woke or a bigot, you're probably not going to listen to what they have to say because you've already decided what they are. If the AAA industry and the games journalists continue to and want to walk hand in hand, scratching each other's back and spitting in the face of their largest demographic audience, then it's also a reasonable assumption that the situation will continue as the status quo and only get worse from here. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.